Welcome to the Hot Fat Guy Club podcast. I've got a wonderful guest today. This is my new friend, Tim. Tim, how are you today?
I'm just waking up. I'm working on coffee.
Nice.
So I am applying to jobs and making my way through the world.
Nice. Making your way downtown, walking fast, places past and I miss you. Da 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 da.
Then you're homebound.
Yeah. This is a crazy tangent to start the episode off with, but that is the 9/11 song for me for whatever reason, because like that song came out right after 9/11, and for whatever reason,
God, isn't that so bad?
It is so bad, and that era of time is just like indelibly linked to that fucking song.
Well, actually, like speaking of like positive masculinity, one of my favorite examples of that, and I know it is a kind of a butt of the joke, but it's Terry Crews and White Chicks singing that song to me.
Oh yeah,
because like Terry Crews is so positive masculinity, like as a representation of that, but he just puts his all into that.
Yep.
Into that scene, and I love it.
Which is so funny because he's such a chud as that character.
Yes.
Yeah. Deep cut on the White Chicks reference. So Tim, tell us a little more about yourself. Where do you live? What do you do for work?
So I'm in Detroit, and I'm a technical project manager. So I work in the tech space. Job search is going about as well as everyone else. There's a lot of people in my situation.
Yep.
And then personally, I'm a nerd. I play video games, D&D, tabletop RPGs. I have a partner, we're poly, and that is going really great. I love her deeply. And then therapy and woodworking. I'm actually making a hutch right now. Oh,
sick.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of weird too, because a thing that like I didn't realize was in therapy, my therapist was like, what do you need to thrive? Not survive, but thrive. And that was a hard exercise because I had never been asked that, but B, I recognize that I need a creative pursuit, which I don't consider myself creative. Like, yeah, I act, yeah, I play music, but when I'm not working on a woodworking project, that I'm really struggling because I'm just like, I don't have something to focus on, which was really crazy. That's about it for me. There's tons of other stuff, but
that's it's funny you say that, because woodworking is one of those things that, like, especially when Nick Offerman really blew up, and I was like, man, woodworking sounds like so much fun.
No, it is a lot of fun. It's a visually creative thing that actually doesn't take a lot of visual choices. It's not like painting a picture where you look at a blank page and then somehow a picture is made. I cannot do that. I recognize about myself, and that's okay. There are so many, like a hutch, for example, you have to worry about the structure and like how does this work, and sometimes people just make build plans. So you can copy those wholesale or like copy as much as you want.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like it.
It's one of those things where I know I would enjoy it, mostly because it would just make me feel very manly to play with all the power tools and have a technical skill. But I know myself too well, and I know that the point between starting and being terrible at it and how long it would take to get anywhere near okay would probably make me quit.
So that's the other thing too, is that like, with the exception of cutting, you can redo a lot of your work in woodworking. Like anything to do with sanding, if you sand something wrong, you just resand it.
Right.
It's okay. Or if you paint something wrong, or cutting is the only kind of point of no return. But even then, just get a new board and it's good.
Yeah.
It does allow for a lot of experimentation and fucking up, but if you fuck up, the whole thing isn't ruined, just that part of it. So you're like, okay, I got a new board. Oh well.
It's a metaphor for life. It's
really easy for life. Yeah.
It's a metaphor for life. It's like, I fucked that up. I'll do it better next time.
Just found a Miss Frizzle quote that was like, if you mess up, find out why. And instead of try again. And I'm like, why wasn't I taught that as a kid? That's so much better than try again.
Right. So let's get into your dating life. So on your intake here, you've used every app under the sun with some luck. It's how you met your exes, and you'd love to find a real life connection, and you feel invisible in spaces that are supposed to be accepting. Talk to me about that.
I grew up as a bigger guy, not
Mm-hmm.
obese, but a bigger guy. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't skinny, but I wasn't obese. And when I grew up, I'm an average height. I'm 5'8".
Uh-huh.
So and then after 2016, for some reason, there was, especially online, there was this whole thing about like being over 6 foot, which I do not get.
Dude, it's so
Um,
fucking stupid. It's so. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. The whole 6 feet tall thing
yeah.
is so fucking stupid. Like,
Well,
no, go
it's
ahead.
incredibly hard to understand. It's hard to understand how much of that is true. Like how many people like share that, because it's one of those, like, people don't want to admit it, but then they only date people over 6 foot.
Yep.
But then it's also weird because online is not real life.
Right.
Um,
And
it's
it's
just
funny
really
too,
weird.
because like, okay, you create that false standard for yourself, right? Like, oh, I'm only going to date a man that's over 6 feet, and Lord knows how many great, incredible guys you're excluding from your own dating pool and making it more difficult for yourself. And like, I say this all the time, like, you can't make a wolf eat a vegan diet, right? You can't convince someone to be
Yeah.
attracted to something that they're not attracted to, but you're not even giving yourself the opportunity to find out that you like a different flavor. And it's one of my old voice teachers
Mhm.
in college. She was a very, very, very famous mezzo soprano, and she is a very tall woman. She was 6'1". And I remember one
Mhm.
time, this woman at the time was like 85 years old, and we're sitting in her studio, and she's telling us a story about her ex-husband, who was 5'6". And this is a verbatim quote, okay? I'm 6 feet tall and 300 pounds. And it's always funny to me, something that just I have noticed in my own life and just in having conversations with women that I've dated or other women that I know that are into bigger guys. They are attracted to larger men because they finally, especially if they're taller, they finally have the opportunity to feel small in someone's arms, right? And there are
Right.
there are some ways in which it makes sense, but I think that, again, you can't convince a wolf to eat a vegan diet, but I also think that it's really, if there's good reasoning behind it, it's fine. But if you're throwing that up
Mhm.
on a dating profile, and if that's the first question you ask someone after you match, of
Mhm.
how tall are you, and then that's your guillotine moment of like, nope, out, not even going to consider.
I,
He was the only man who ever fucked me that could fuck me and suck my tits at the same time. 85-year-old woman telling me this in the middle of a voice lesson. I have it on tape somewhere on an old cell phone. And me and the pianist and my other friend that was sitting in on the lesson are all just sitting there like, oh. Amazed of like, oh, okay, great. And you know what? Height can be altered. Like, you can wear a boot with a heel on it. Like, I'm 6 feet tall and I wear boots with 2.5 inch heels on it to make me look taller.
yeah.
It doesn't fucking matter. It truly does not matter. And there are some cases in which, like, I have a friend that I've gone out with a couple of times, and she is 6'1". And so she has a decent reason to want to date men of a certain height. Like, that is reasonably acceptable. Like, yeah, you are already taller than everyone else. I understand that. But
Right.
if I'm sorry, if you're 5'4" and you're like, no, only men over 6 feet, like, oh, go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. You rude,
What's
insecure little
weird
person.
too What's weird is, like, and this is only anecdotal, but like the smaller you are, the taller you tend to want.
Yeah.
Like I've noticed a lot of women that are like 5'5" to like 5'10", we'll say, they want like average dudes, but the smaller ones always want someone. It's super weird,
Yeah.
and then it's like really incesty and creepy too when like you actually look at them side by side.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It's like looking at the
Um,
mountain and his wife. It is one of the funniest side by sides I've ever seen. Their TikTok account is
exactly.
hilarious. They do such a good job of playing up the you're 6'8" and she is not. Anything about your personality or who you are or what you do or how you treat me, It's like, oh no, you're not 6 feet tall. You're a centimeter under 6 feet. Nope, not going to happen. Like, are you going to go on a first date with a fucking measuring tape and check to see? So
Right. Well, and then it becomes like we all agree it's ridiculous, and yet there are enough people that is their requirement that you can't like single them out anymore. Does that make sense? Where
yep,
you're like, okay, I dodged a bullet. Like I'll date somebody who's better. But then if everyone, at least in an online space, has that, then you're like, okay, what do I do now? Because you can't, unlike weight, unlike hair color, whatever, you actually can't do anything about your
right,
height without expensive surgery. Like that's very
right,
dangerous.
which is
Um,
honestly ridiculous. The height. I don't remember. I don't know the term for it, but like having surgery to make yourself taller is fucking absurd.
yeah, yeah. So there's that, and then like there in real life spaces, a problem I've been having has been, and this came up a lot in on TikTok of like, hey, why don't men approach anymore? And
Mm-hmm.
I made a TikTok on this subject because it fundamentally comes down to like, assume for a second I'm gay and I see you at the end of the bar.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I don't know, or like a grocery store or coffee shop or wherever. I don't know if A, you want to be approached right now, or B, you want to be approached by me
Mm-hmm.
right now. And I can't read your mind. And that's like, by the way, that's the one thing that online apps do right, which
Mm-hmm.
is everyone there, by being on there, wants to be approached. They're like sending that signal.
Yep.
And in real life, you just don't have that. Now, mind you, there is stuff like if they have headphones in and are reading a book at a cafe, they probably don't want to be approached.
Yep.
But if they're like wandering lumber at Home Depot, which I know was a meme, but like, do they want to be approached? I don't know. Like,
Yep.
and I don't want to interrupt someone's day,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a perfectly valid thing to be like, hey, I don't want to be bothered. Like
Right.
that is a fundamental human thing that I agree that everyone is allowed to have. I don't want to interrupt that. But it becomes this, okay, you don't want to be bothered, cool. I respect that entirely. Then what do I do? Like,
Right.
because it's also I'm an introvert and I tend to like nerdy people. They're not at clubs. They're not at
Mm-hmm.
bars. They're at home, like watching like their favorite show for the 15th time. Like,
Right. Okay. So all
um,
right. So I'm going to challenge you here. Answer your own question. How do you? Where can you go? What can you do to meet those introverted, nerdy people?
I've been struggling with that,
Yeah.
because outside of community theater, which I do
Mm-hmm.
do, and those are kind of my people,
Yep.
and a lot of those people are
And we all
married.
know how
So,
horny community theater can be.
oh, and Wally, and like, yeah, like there's that is my area. But even that, like, I live in one of the Detroit area is one of the biggest community theater areas in terms of
Mm-hmm.
population. But even then, we're only talking about like 500 people in the Metro Detroit area, which
Right.
yes sounds like a lot, but like cut that in half to women only, and then keep going.
Right.
Um, so it's that kind of thing of like, okay, and then yeah, like maybe they're at a cafe reading a book. Um, but yeah, I'm struggling with that because I don't know where they would be.
So
Besides Ren Fair. Ren Fair
yeah.
is fair.
Right. Yeah. That. Right. So there's wisdom in what you have said already of like, how do I know if someone wants to be approached or not? And like it's very important to understand when someone is making themselves, is open to being approached or having a conversation versus when is not. And you have to be
Mm.
very conscious of doing that. Like, I live in New York City. When you see it, it feels like daily one of my friends posts a video on their Instagram story or something where they're sitting with their hood on, headphones, reading a book or deep into their phone, and some man ignores all of the signs of them not wanting to be talked to or being approached, and then annoying them with that. And I think
Yeah.
it really it comes down to preparing yourself for being able to talk to any and all strangers, not even approaching just like a woman that you want to ask out on a date, but being able to approach anyone and talking to anyone about anything. And
Mm.
it is incredibly difficult and terrifying to start conversations with strangers because there's so much tied into like our own self-esteem of like, oh God, what if they don't like me? Like, who gives a shit? They're a stranger. The odds of you ever seeing them again are very low. And it sometimes really is
Right.
just as simple as like, hi, I'm Tim. That
Yeah.
also really depends on the setting that you're in, of course. But,
Right.
it
Yeah, I've
you
noticed
don't,
that. Like,
go ahead.
go ahead. Sorry.
You don't
No, I've
know.
noticed that I've actually been doing that as well.
Hmm.
Where I've been going up to people, like if I need something, I've been asking them,
Hmm.
like which is way easier. Or something I thankfully learned several years ago now, which is like if you want to compliment somebody, specifically a woman, just without like flirting, just compliment. Always compliment them on something that they can control, because that is an
Yes.
actual compliment.
Yep.
Not like, and it gets tricky with hair. That's why I just avoid that. But like, this woman had like a really cool pants that had like a pocket perfectly for her phone,
Right.
and these were like jogger type pants. And I'm like, that's so awesome. You have like a specific dedicated phone pocket. And we got into like women aren't allowed to have pockets and all that. It was a fun little conversation. But like, there was no intent behind it
Yep.
besides like, hey, cool phone pocket, like,
Right. Well,
it's actually been easy.
you're reaching out. You're giving the opportunity to start a conversation, and then you're giving them the control to continue to engage or to just say, "Oh, thank you so much," and to move on. You know
Yeah.
that is definitely a like pickup lines don't work. Reaching out and offering
Mm.
the opportunity for a conversation with an easy out to it is the perfect way, because it's non-threatening and it's you're not expecting anything. You're being genuine, and you genuinely mean the compliment that you're giving, and you're not expecting anything in return, which I think is really important. And I'm going to plug this every time because I wrote it and I'm shameless, but in the Hot Fat Guy Club Confidence Guide, which you can get for free on hotfatguyclub.com, one of the things I talk about is giving compliments to people. There's a great Eckhart Tolle quote: "Abundance only comes to those who have it. Whatever you feel like the world is withholding from you, you are withholding from the world." So if you want more attention, more
Mm.
compliments, more human interaction, you have to put that energy out into the world in order to get that back from people. And
Yeah.
there are good compliments and there are bad compliments. There was one day I was so rude to this poor woman, but she caught me in a bad mood on a bad day. I get the "you look like Zach Galifianakis" comparison all the time, and I hate that comparison because the version of
Yeah.
Zach Galifianakis that they are comparing me to is Alan in The Hangover, who is the butt of the joke, right? And that it
Yeah.
means no disrespect to Zach Galifianakis as an actor, as an artist, as a person. I admire the hell out of him as all of the above. He is incredibly talented. He's incredibly funny, but it's specific to that character and that comparison that I don't like, because people are saying like, "Hey, fat ass, this is the only other fat person that I know in the world, and you look like him." And this woman came up to me and she was like, "Oh my God, I'm sure people tell you this all the time, but did you know that you look just like Zach Galifianakis?" I was like, "I fucking hate that comparison." And the look on her face
Yeah.
when I said that, I was just like, I fucking hate when people tell me that I look like Zach Galifianakis, because one, I don't. Two, it's ridiculous. And she was like so shocked that I would have said that, was that blunt about it.
Yeah.
But the compliments of, "Oh my God, you look
Yeah.
like XYZ person," bad compliment. And you're totally right. Compliments about things that you can control are that the other person can control are vastly better to give to someone, because it's something that like if it's a pair of glasses, if it's something in their outfit, if it's a bag, if it's their dog, it's like something that they made the choice to incorporate into their look, into their aesthetic, into their daily routine, whatever. When someone
Yeah.
changes their, if someone changes their facial hair, they get a haircut or they get a tattoo. Like, I always like to compliment tattoos because I have a shit ton of tattoos. I like cool tattoos. You have cool tattoos. Like, and tattoos are always a fun thing to talk about. Because a
Especially with
lot of
other
times,
tattooed people.
right, and a lot of times there's good stories behind it. Like my favorite
Oh,
tattoo
yeah.
story is when I got this tattoo. How do I turn this so the camera can actually fucking see it? When
That's
I
a
got
hard.
this tattoo, I was with my partner
Yeah.
Kelly in Portugal, and we went to go get flash tattoos. And the artist that we ended up linking up with was like, "I don't do small tattoos," and this was as small.
No.
It's my whole forearm basically, and this was as small as we could get him
Jeez.
to agree to do. And the name of the tattoo shop we got it at was Heavy Handers, and we should have taken that as a warning because this dude pressed
Oh
harder
man, that must have
than
hurt.
any tattoo artist I've ever had. And the funniest part was his stepdaughter, who was like 4 years old at the time and only spoke Portuguese, was in the shop making fun of me the whole time because of how much of a fucking wuss I was being because how much this tattoo hurt. And it was really funny because she's making fun of me in Portuguese, he's translating into English, and then she's laughing. It was awesome. And
She's
so,
like, no, you gotta actually hear this insult, man. Like, it's great.
yeah,
So funny.
yeah.
No,
She's like,
that's funny you got it in Portugal. All this arm is all tattoos from when I've traveled.
nice.
Like when I travel, when I come back, I get a tattoo commemorating it. So it gives me an excuse to keep traveling and an excuse to keep getting tattoos.
Right.
So it's really really funny that you got it while traveling.
Yep. Yeah, it's it's a fun way to commemorate the thing. What was also really funny is this was in late 2021, right, Kelly? Portugal, 21? Yeah, late 2021. And the COVID regulations in Portugal literally changed while we were in the tattoo shop. So then when we tried to go to dinner afterward, they were like, "Oh, do you have this thing?" We were like, "Well, what the fuck is that?" We have our
Yeah.
vaccine cards, we have all the other things, but we don't have that. I don't know what you're talking about. When we're in social situations where I think in our everyday lives, it's a little bit more difficult to approach people. But I do think that that is something where, yes, we have to be really mindful of respecting the other person's respect and personal space and autonomy 100%. I also think that something that can set us apart in a lot of these interactions is having the actual balls to approach someone. And
Mhm.
what the real secret sauce is, in my opinion. Oh, hello, buddy. Who is this?
This is Jack o' Lantern. He's orange and
Yeah,
Debbie and 2 years old.
nice. Hi, buddy. He's
And he will
cute.
leave me alone all day except when I'm on the phone.
Of course. So, to actually have the balls to just go up and say something to someone is a rare skill. And it's a skill. It's something that you can teach yourself how to be better at by talking to strangers and by talking to strangers in low stakes situations.
Yeah.
And one of the things, one of the tips that I always like to give to myself and to other people is talk to old people and talk to people with dogs, because
Oh yeah.
people, dogs are always easy because like, oh, can I pet your dog? And then 99% of the time they will say yes, right? And then you can just talk to them about the dog. And then, you get the dopamine hit of meeting and petting a dog. Like it's good for everybody. The dog is happy, you're happy, the owner's happy. It's great. Talk to old people. They are desperate to talk to people because, again, like, we're all lonely. I live in New York City. I'm surrounded by 10 million people. I live with my partner. I love her more than anything in the world. I have tons of friends. I talk to my best friend on the phone every day. I still feel desperately lonely all the time. We all feel lonely all the time, and we all desperately want to connect.
Yeah, that's what's so crazy is this male loneliness. I hate calling it an epidemic, but it's something I've felt where I want connection.
Right.
And but I spend a lot of my time alone.
Right.
Like if we quantify like hours in the day type of thing.
Yeah.
And I've been like, but if you like put it on paper, yeah, I got friends. Yeah, I have a partner. Like, I should not be lonely, but it's a feeling.
Yeah.
And I think like that gets into it. Like you talk about, you made a TikTok recently that was like one of the best ways of approaching somebody or like of not coming off as creepy is your relationship to yourself. I think
Yep.
something like that.
Yep.
And that really hit home because I recognize that, like, to your point earlier about like going up to somebody, when I do that, I'm immediately I feel like a teenage boy. Like
Hmm.
I even like if you were like watch me or something, I bet I would take on the mannerisms of a teenage boy with like slumped shoulders, like not projecting confidence. Um, and I think I still feel that way,
Hmm.
which is funny, but also like hard
Right.
to do.
Dude, I do
Um,
the same thing. I do the same thing. In fact, there's a person at the boxing gym that I go to that I have a big fat crush on that I now get made fun of whenever I bring it up. Because your cat is so funny. Because every time I try to talk to them, we always end up being either next to each other in class, and we always end up picking lockers right next to each other in the like communal locker room. And
just leave her a note.
I can't ever bring the conversation past like, how are your classes this week? She's a dance teacher. And like I never have
How are you
anything more to
doing?
say than that. It's like, damn it, like 13-year-old me is driving the fucking car right now.
It's so funny.
And
Yeah, it's so funny.
going back to your own, the more confident you are in yourself. And I am actually amending my stance on that. I think it's the better you are at being able to self-validate, right? Because I think a lot of times when you see people that approach people in public, especially like let's say you're in a bar and you see, in New York City, it's like dudes that just graduated from college in the last 3 years, live in Murray Hill, are still trying to relive their glory days in their fraternity and are very peacocky, right? The
Yeah,
dude bros, so to speak. And watching the
yeah,
way that they approach women in bars and the way they treat them and the way they act like idiots. And they're doing that to, perform masculinity for themselves and for the other guys that they're with, and to be like, yo, look at how good I am at getting women to talk to me and do this and blah 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 blah. And they're there looking for external validation from not only the woman but from all of their friends, versus when you're going to
yeah,
talk to someone, when you know that you can validate yourself and you're going to talk to somebody at, and the way that you can handle that rejection if they don't want to talk to you, or if they don't want to go on a date with you, or if they don't want to give you your number, or any number of ways that you can get rejected in that situation, right? The way that
yeah,
you handle that rejection is truly the secret sauce, because other people in that space are going to notice that, number one. Number two,
mm,
it's going to make an impact on the person that you're talking to and also on you. I made a video about how to handle rejection after the whole alpha dom bullshit, right? That whole you do
oh my
not
gosh.
have to accept her rejection bullshit. It's like, no, actually, you
Jeez.
do. But I had
Yeah.
hundreds of comments on the video that I made about that, where women were saying, when a man gracefully handles me rejecting him, it actually changes. In some cases, it can change my mind about the rejection, where it's like,
Yep.
no, okay, and then you walk away. It's like, oh, maybe I fucked up saying no there, and like,
Yeah, I'm the
whether or
same way
not
with
whether or not
I'm the
that's
same way
true
with
in the moment,
online dating.
but you never know.
Yeah,
Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
well, I'm the same way with online dating, where it just doesn't work out for XYZ reasons. Um, I just say like, all right, take care, best
Yep.
of luck, and like leave their number.
Yeah.
And because like here's the thing, and I've learned this. I learned this very early on because it's very similar to getting fired.
Hmm.
Like if we consider like dating and looking for a job slash working a job are very 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 similar. Where you apply for a job, aka message a girl, and then you go on a first date, aka first interview, and then maybe second, third, fourth date slash interview, and then eventually you get the job. And then you meet all of your coworkers, aka her friends, and then you're
Right.
working the job 40 hours a week, being in a relationship. Being laid off, being fired, that is being rejected.
Yes.
And if they have already made the decision to fire you, aka reject you, there's nothing you can do to change their mind. Like
Right.
anything you are always already in the loser in the losing bracket. Like you're done. Like the best you can do is like save yourself
Yep.
the embarrassment and like self and have the self respect of being like okay, take care,
Right.
and and really mean it. That's the other part. Um,
Right.
and then move on with your day.
Yep. And you said something here, when you try to speak with someone I find attractive, most of the time they'll walk away. Tell me about that, and tell me about your experience with that, and what.
In real life, and in relationships, I have been viewed as a threat a lot of times, and that
Okay.
causes me to like make myself small. And
How
I think
so?
that's a very universal
Define
experience.
that for me.
So I have obviously, and I think this is a universal experience. I've dated people who have had um, DV or like other forms of violence happen towards them,
Mm-hmm.
or just had shitty guys. And when they come to me, or when they start dating me, their headlights are, or their walls are already up,
Mm-hmm.
and they are very like, hey, and it's true. Like that's the part that sucks is like, hey, you can kill me at any point. Like you are
Yeah.
a threat to me. Um, and this happens in intimate relationships, but then it also happens in just navigating the world where I am hyper aware. And sometimes it's funny. Like one time I used to live right by a hospital, and I have horrible insomnia. And there was a time when I would run at like 2 a.m. Because I figure if I get stabbed, I'm right there. And I ran around the hospital, and I happened to stop my run right behind this nurse, and it was a parking garage. I'm like, cool, so you're probably like going to the parking garage, and I'm like 15 feet behind her. Um, and she doesn't go to the parking garage. I'm like, fuck, please don't go to my apartment building. Sure enough, she makes a right, she makes a left, and it looks like I'm stalking this woman that's getting off work at 2 a.m. And in that moment, I'm just like, fuck, I need to go home, but I'm a threat to her right now, and like that's one, but there's tons of them. Like being on an elevator, being near someone, near a woman, like you feel their hyper vigilance, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like you feel that they're on it because you're around, and that's a really shitty feeling. I understand it, but because of that, I have tried making myself small as like
Mm-hmm.
not a threat, as a way, but then that has the opposite effect where if I try to talk to somebody, I continue to make myself feel small because I'm like, hey, I'm not a threat. Like I feel like I need to get over like that hurdle before I can even talk to somebody, which is really hard. And
Mm-hmm.
then when they walk away, it's a lot of like, I don't view you as a romantic prospect, basically, or I don't want to continue
Mm-hmm.
this conversation. And I have to respect that, obviously, but that's just what I've observed through a lot of.
Those are very valid observations, and I think that the sheer fact that you're aware of that uh, is a lot more than a lot of other men can say.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good opportunity for like audience participation, especially any women that are listening to this. Like, what advice do you have for Tim in those moments to you
Yeah.
know on how to subtly communicate without saying like I'm safe, right? Because who know, you can't just say that. They're not going to believe you. Like if you come right out and be like, oh, don't worry, I'm safe, that's immediately going to be like,
Yeah.
why the fuck are you saying that to me?
I'm better. I'm
uh,
better than the bear. Like,
right.
yeah.
And I think having the awareness of that in the first place is a good thing. And then the question is, what do you do to get yourself over that hurdle, right? And I think that in certain situations where like it's just you and a woman you've never met before on an elevator or in a parking garage at 2 o'clock in the morning or walking down the street, like what are the things you can do that you can communicate, that you're not a threat? And like when I walk my dog at night in New York City and I happen upon there's like a woman walking by themselves, I will cross the street. Like I don't want to put them in a position where they feel like they might be in danger, things like that. Like I'm hyper aware of that. I think
Yeah.
it's very different when you're in more social settings, like if you're at a bar or a party or things like that, where like people are there to
Yeah.
talk to other people and connect. And I think that, just a general rule of thumb is, I usually won't talk to people unless there's I see that there's an opening to talk to them, right? Like if we make eye contact multiple times, or if I have the brand of ADHD where when I'm in a restaurant, I'm in every single conversation in the restaurant. I'm a messy bitch and I love to eavesdrop, and I will just like drop
Oh,
myself into
same.
conversations all the time. And
My
everyone
favorite is
like,
first dates, observing first dates
oh my god,
at like
oh
coffee shops
god,
and
they're
shit.
so much fun. Oh, especially
Well, because
bad
then
first
you
dates.
realize you want some good confidence. Go watch other dudes go on first dates because
Yeah.
they also suck at it. And there was
Yes.
a guy. I was like, I like reading at a cafe. Like that's my thing.
What are you
And
reading right now?
um, I'm reading "Who Hurt You,"
Okay.
uh, which is a really offensive name for a book, but it's a better version of internal family systems, um,
Cool.
and how if you've ever read "The Body Keeps the Score," it relates to that as well, and basically
Yep.
how trauma. Because I have CPTSD, so I try to understand it, and there are tons of other people that obviously have it, but how trauma affects your brain and your development,
Right.
and it's very well done. It's like an interview with Oprah though. Like she's the interviewer and she's in the book, so it's a weird way of doing a book because it almost reads like a
Interesting.
news article
Right.
rather than a book. But it's still really well written, still really very easy to read, um, and yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
All right. All right.
What
That's
about
a
you?
good
What are you
one. The
reading?
5 books that are kind of in my constant rotation are A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. Healing the Shame That
Ooh,
Binds You by John Bradshaw is my version of the Bible. The Tough
okay.
Standard by Dr. Ronald Levant, which Dr. Ronald Levant, if you've never heard of him, all of my work with Hot Fat Guy Club is based off of his work. So he basically invented psychology for men. Psychology
Oh, okay.
was really not for men until the 60s. And he came along in the 1980s and he started something called the Boston University Fatherhood Institute. And he developed a I read a lot of his, like I keep a pretty steady rotation of every psychology journal that he's ever written for, diet of reading those
Mhm.
because I'm obsessed with his work. But the Tough Standard is one that I come back to constantly. He developed two things that I'm really fond of that I base a lot of my work off of, which is normative male alexithymia, which is his hypothesis that because of and traditional the 7 pillars of traditional masculinity ideology, which are the resistance to all things feminine, the restriction of the expression of vulnerable and caring emotions, toughness, dominance, self-reliance, super like a playboy norm interest in sex, and disdain or hatred for racial, sexual, or gender identity minorities,
Mm,
and how being raised in a society or in families where the idea that that version of masculinity was obligatory, and the only emotions that you were really ever able to show were anger, has
yep.
led to and generations of men who do not know how to feel their feelings or verbalize their feelings at all. Like they have
Yep.
no ability to. There's an example. The podcast episode where I discovered Dr. Levant was a therapy chat episode, and he talks about how at the Boston University Fatherhood Institute, there was this man that came in and he was raging one day. He had a plan with his son, and his son had bailed last minute, and he was super visibly angry and upset and sad, and just the myriad of
Mm,
emotions that he felt about that. And they sat him down in front of all this camera equipment, and they did a whole role play, and they went through all of these things. And the only thing that he could get him to say about how he felt was, I guess I was disappointed. That's it.
mm,
That's all he could get out of him. And he was like, compare that same situation to a mother and all of the myriad of emotions that she could have said. Well, at first I was really angry because I had planned my whole day around having this plan, and then I was sad because I was really excited about doing it, and then I was really worried, like, what did I say or do to my child that made them not want to do this with me? And then then I was starting to feel really anxious about, like, maybe I did something wrong, blah 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 blah. Where like it became to this place where like men are not able to feel or verbalize what their emotions are. and it just turns into this black hole of anger and rage, because those are the only acceptable emotions in our current society that we're allowed to have.
And that's
So
a
I,
very, and it's weird too because I have, so it's funny you mentioned the anger thing. I actually have a different relationship with anger where because I grew up without a dad. And
uh-huh,
so I, uh, I spent so much of my childhood being angry at him and also being a teenager. You're kind of just angry at the world, just naturally. Um, I spent so long being angry that I eventually gave up on anger because I'm just
mm-hmm,
like, there's no point to this. It doesn't do anything. It just leaves you angry. And now it's kind of maladaptive as an adult where the one emotion I'm allowed to have, I actually don't view as useful
right,
because even though it is a valid emotion, and so I can't, and also when I have expressed it in the past, it has been, um, it has been viewed as a threat again with intimate partners
yep,
where even though I'm not being violent, I'm not throwing anything or slinging insults, etc., I can't express that around somebody. I can
mm-hmm,
express maybe frustration, but not that makes me angry
yep,
because they immediately go into like shut down or go into like survival mode and get triggered, which sucks because like it sucks for them because obviously I don't want to trigger them, but then like anger is still a valid emotion and it
mm-hmm,
is a very gendered emotion, but it's still one of the basic ones. So
right,
how do you keep that while also allowing all these other emotions to be around? And it's
yeah,
tricky.
and it is very tricky, and a lot of it comes down to with how you're able to regulate your immune system, not immune, Jesus Christ, your immune
Mm.
system, your nervous system, of like what are the ways that you can, I think that's one of the things where like you can be how can you be angry without it being like a match to magnesium, where that anger causes you to explode and you can't control
Yeah.
yourself anymore. And I think that is the real distinction of how can I feel my anger and not be blinded by it. And I think a lot of men really struggle with that because they were never given the tools to do that otherwise.
I mentioned earlier, how do you have and you in a lot of your videos you have like you you hammer it home in different ways and it just doesn't seem to get through to a lot of people or maybe it
Mm-hmm.
does. But how do you have that good relationship with yourself? Because myself, it kind of like it is reinforced in over and over and over that men aren't good and
Mm-hmm.
therefore I am not good. And I don't want to blame society for my problems, but like there's this thought of like, well, if I'm not good, therefore why like if there's no good there, why work on myself? Why have a good relationship to myself? Because I'm already not good. And I'm using like very basic language because like
Mm-hmm.
it starts very early, and I think like if you ever read the Will of Change by Bell Hooks,
Oh yeah,
talking
oh
about
yeah.
like
That's
how
that's that's my fifth book. That's the other one
yeah
that's always in the rotation. Yep.
yeah where I'm telling all men and I think all women should read that book. All men should read it because it's the most seen I've ever felt reading a
Right.
book. Um, where boys have to we're talking young boys like 5, 6, 7, they have to cut out parts of themselves in order to fit into society,
Yep.
and that starts at like 6. I'm now 37. Like how do you have that better relationship with yourself? Because I'm just now getting to the point of like, okay, all these people say that I have worth and I'm great and I'm funny and smart and have integrity and blah blah blah. I guess I gotta believe him. So what? But I still don't like. I still think my partner is doing community service. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
think like I have worth, and yet I want to. But like, how do you have that better relationship with yourself? And I know it's not a simple solution, but yeah, like how do you have that? How do you
So
begin to have that? I guess.
that one Bell Hooks quote from The Will to Change that I love, that every time I read this quote, it ends up igniting a certain subsect of people on the internet that I don't want to involve in this conversation. And this is just a funny anecdote before I get into answering your question. But literally every single time I ever put this quote on social media, the anti-circumcision weirdos start coming out in droves, which it's not what we're fucking talking about, but it is the first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves, and if an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. And this is something that is very important to me because I think that there has been a nearly a decade of telling all men that they're terrible, which for the most part is true. But there is always an exception to the rule. And I think what the real issue in my mind is that there is not a clear definition of what the issue with men is. And I think that when you use something like toxic masculinity as an umbrella term, that doesn't mean anything. Because you can't look at a 3-year-old boy and say, you're toxic. You're 3 years old, right? It is not masculinity itself that is toxic or problematic. It is the sense that the version of masculinity and patriarchy that we are brought up in this society is made to feel obligatory to boys and men, and that you must conform to it, and that if you don't, you're wrong. And that's why I prefer Ronald Levant's traditional masculinity ideology definition, because I think that covers a lot more of what women's issues with men are. And it really, like, especially the resistance to all things feminine and the restriction of the expression of vulnerable and caring emotions, and the fact that dominance is such an important part of it. Because if you are not someone who is a dominant person, right, inherently, and you try to act that way to prove your masculinity, the most likely people that you're going to take that out against are people that you perceive as weaker than you or are below you. And for a lot of men, that's women, because they don't see women as people. And that gets way more complicated when you talk about like emotion socialization and just like the inherent separation of boys and girls in schools that is just like accidental, unintentional gender segregation. Where I was a preschool teacher for almost 10 years, boys and girls almost never play with each other, and boys and girls don't really, boys don't start to notice girls until they get into middle school, and then the hormones are raging and puberty's hitting, and they start to see girls as sexual objects versus people. And that's something that's really, really difficult. And so how do we, as the men who are the exception to the rule, and we do see women as people, and we do see them as deserving of autonomy, and we understand all of the grievances that they have with the men of the world, because we can see all of those grievances in the real world as they are happening on a regular basis, and understand them to be true. And how do we separate ourselves from being lumped into that? I think that, being able to see it in and of itself is a huge part of it. Being aware of it, being able to name the beast is being able to tame the beast. And then it is setting the example for ourselves and for others of what that looks like to be a safe man, to be safe in your masculinity, to be safe in who you are. And I do think it comes back to being able to validate yourself as well. Of like, if you don't need a woman to validate you to feel like a man, if you don't need to have power over a woman or other people to make you feel like a man, that is a huge aspect of it. And, like, just the sheer fact that you have read A Will to Change is already puts you on a higher pedestal than most men, because you have a much deeper, way more higher level understanding than this of this than most people. And all you can do is do the work. And I think that you need to sit with those parts of yourself that are afraid of that part of you, right? And sit with that a little bit more and figure out what really is the deeper meaning and the deeper cause of that, because that's where the work really is, I think.
I'm reading internal family systems
Mm-hmm.
books, where it's something I noticed as part of EMDR, and I'm sorry we're over time, uh, was there's kind of three parts of you at any time, depending on how old you are. There's the kid part of you, there's the teenager part of you, and then there's kind of the adult. And there's a fourth
Mm-hmm.
one, I call it the wise mind part, where this is you and like you're healed, you're good, and you have to talk to all of them. And man, you want a good cry sesh? Imagine imagine that you are Ghost of Christmas Passing, but talking to your younger self.
Yeah.
You want a good cry? Do that thought exercise. And
Yep.
because if we ever saw like a kid crying, we would comfort them, hug them, whatever. And yet we don't do that with ourselves. But
Right.
if you imagine yourself as a kid, it like short circuits it in a weird way.
Yep.
But yeah.
I used to do EMDR, and it was really helpful, and it was very helpful when I was doing it. I have something that I'm going to send to you, but I'll put it in the notes for the episode as well. John Bradshaw did a PBS mini series. He did 10 lectures on PBS in the 80s or 90s called Homecoming. And in the 6th episode of Homecoming, he talks about the school age child and what happens to you when you are at school age and you leave the home for the first time to go to school. And one of the most incredible things that I've ever seen is he does an inner child exercise with these people who are, I'm 32, our parents' age. And he is leading them through this inner child meditation. And all of these people that are pretty much our parents are sitting in this room holding teddy bears, sobbing their fucking eyes out, doing this inner child meditation. And like to go through it with yourself is incredible. If anyone wants to look it up before I'm able to put it in the notes, or if you, it's John Bradshaw Homecoming number 6, and it's at 48 minutes, at like the 48-minute mark in the video. And I remember the first time I saw it, I'd been a fan of John Bradshaw's work for like a decade. And when I saw that for the first time, I was like, oh man, we're all broken. We're all just sad little kids, and we're all deeply traumatized, and we're all just hurt people hurting each other. And, there are some of us that are trying to support other people and not make it worse for everyone. And there are other people and who have like dealt with some of those demons and some of that hurt. And then there are a lot of other people who have not dealt with those demons and dealt with that hurt, and they want to make it everyone else's problem. And, we as hot fat guys and members of the Hot Fat Guy Club have an opportunity to be the role model that we never had growing up. And we have the opportunity to be positive male role models for other men in our lives. And I think that's one of the ways that like you, Tim, specifically can make yourself feel better about your manhood, your masculinity, is like being that man, that role model that you needed when you were 3, 6, 9, damn they fine, 12, 15, right? Like you get to be the role model that you never had growing up now.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm trying to be. And it's ironic because my partner has 2 kids, and so I'm I'm both getting pissed off at my childhood and being so grateful that I'm there for them. So yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Yeah, if you ever want to do this again, let me know.
So we are going to do this again. Actually, this was one of the things I forgot to tell you. So what I want to do with this first round of guys that I talked to is we're going to check back in about 6 weeks or 2 months, and see where things are after this first conversation, and just kind of check in and do things like that, because I think that's going to be really interesting for us and for anyone who listens to this as well. So, Tim, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for listening. You can find us on all social media at Hot Fat Guy Club, and sign up at hotfatguyclub.com. Stay hot, stay fat, my friends.